Hi, everyone. This is Flavio Gomes, founder of LogiSense Corporation, and we're here yet again with another LogiSense podcast. Today, we have Pete Morelli from Holden Advisors, and he's been a busy man guiding people through the world of pricing and value and outcomes. How are you doing, Pete?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Flavio, man. Looking forward to this.
Me too. Me too. Me too. So, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself? And I know you've already had a podcast with Adam, and you've really dove deep in that podcast. But just, again, just to remind everyone who you are and where you come from and what's your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Pete Morelli, I'm a partner at a professional services firm called Holden Advisors. At our core, we're a value-based pricing consultancy. And in layman's speak, what I like to say is we help our clients get paid for the value that they provide to their customers. For us, that means B2B customers for 95% of our clients, but that industry ranges from industrials, manufacturing, distribution, to tech and enterprise software and SaaS, to some long tail businesses and professional services or financial services. So really across the spectrum, but very much in the B2B world.
Great. And when do you think the pricing narrative and conversation really started around the value drivers on usage and outcome? Because I have some interesting perspectives that I want to share.
Yeah, I mean, sort of I'll say the classic case studies that I, learned about in business school were sort of the Rolls-Royce GE engine, power by the hour, and then kind of the Michelin fleet tire lease model where it's like the tires by the mile. Those are kind of the classic early examples of moving from a capital expense to more of an operational expense, and win-win for really both sides. It was much more predictable and transparent and kind of aligned with the way those companies wanted to buy. And also made it a unique model for those sellers as well.
I was just going to say that, and it's surprisingly you read my mind with our work in the IoT industry. When machine to machine first started to emerge, there was talk about outcome based pricing with GE as an example with the jet engines, and they would price based on the lease and based on how pilots used the engine, and if they were very careful and saved the engine from any wear and tear, they would get a cheaper price overall. And then you saw the insurance industry do the same thing. The sensors provided real-time information in order to inform and identify behaviors that could then be priced accordingly.
Yep. And I remember when early days with that sort of insurance model, there was actually GPS sensors they'd place in the car. And now you have to just use your phone app, right? Because it's got all the telemetry right there. And then, that's sort of the run version of kind of the full integration. And then you see some smaller proxies that are like, hey, if you drive fewer miles, like you have a show car, or you can prove that you're less than 5,000 miles a year with kind of odometer screenshots, that's also a discounted price break. Sure. So you don't have to track each one, but it's kind of a proxy for that usage.
So it's essentially old wine in a new bottle. I like using that phrase. We've been talking about this for decades, if not more.
Yeah.
How do you see things have changed as a result?
So it's interesting. I would say it's not every industry is the same, but the trend is unequivocally moving towards value, maybe not usage based or outcome based in every instance, but certainly outcome aligned, where you're moving towards. So in that example, it's okay, we'll take a screenshot and we figure that maybe you're driving safer, maybe you're not, but at least you're driving less. Right. And I think we see different flavors of that across all industries, where everyone's looking for, a couple of things are driving this. They're looking for predictability in their revenue. They also want upside in certain cases when they're driving true value and they believe in it and they think their customers believe in it. And I think also the market, this trend of recurring revenue worth a higher multiple than one-time bookings, And so I think everyone's searching for the ways that they can have some sort of subscription or recurring revenue within their own business, even if that's professional services, even if that's manufacturing, not just tech and software. So I think everyone sees that opportunity. And then there's just different ways in which they're trying to move. And often it's in this hybrid model where it's not a full migration on day one. It's how do we dip our toe in it to test something, maybe keep a smaller percentage of our revenue in that new metric, and then over time evolve towards something that's more balanced.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think all the conversations are leading to this general consensus that a hybrid model is where most people are sticking with and exploring in more detail. I think from my opinion and perspective, there are transactional elements across the value chain that we can harvest to create value and to create a monetized mechanism for generating revenue. And I think the outcome-based models seem very long-tailed to me, and there's so many different elements to how a customer perceives value. Right? You know, when I have conversations with marketers, it's all about perceived value. But the key driver from a customer's perspective is they want to differentiate themselves into the marketplace. So they don't want to be compared to everyone else in their market segment. And so their perception of value is different than some others. How do you think about how to align that so there's some consistency on what outcomes mean?
Yeah. So a couple thoughts. The first is that in the Holden Advisors definition of value, let me define that first. And so in our B2B focused world, you can do one of three things for customers. And in every industry, it's the same. You can either help your customers increase their revenues, reduce their costs, or mitigate some financial risk or liability. Obviously, the individual activities that roll into that could be one thing in the world of software and automation versus in manufacturing with higher productivity.
Right.
But ultimately, you want to have an impact in your client's P&L.
Sure.
So that's what we say is value. Now, we typically find that by conducting market research, talking to our customers, talking to our clients' customers, whether that's a quantitative or qualitative type of research. But when you're able to do that, what I typically find is that internal to our clients, like within a company's four walls, they often think about features and benefits as sort of the primary value they deliver to their customers. They're always very product service centric. And so they're really thinking about the aspects of what it is they deliver rather than necessarily the outcomes that it drives and the reasons that maybe certain stakeholders of their customers are actually buying.
Right.
So that's sort of the first thing, is to switch your perspective. It's hard to read the label from inside the bottle. And sometimes you just have to talk to your customers to sort of figure that out. What's interesting about your question on the metric is that oftentimes, so you want to figure out how do you drive more financial impact than some alternative that your customer can choose. Maybe that's a DIY in-house solution. Maybe that's your competitor. Maybe that's do nothing, status quo.
Right.
And so you really need to find that and then communicate it, verbalize it. But one of the interesting things that we've been finding is that in a market that gets either more commoditized or is competitive, a different metric for monetizing is actually can be a competitive advantage. So even if you're providing something that feels kind of table stakes, there's going to be different audiences that want to pay in certain ways than others. And so that can actually be a differentiator, even if it feels like you're having a hard time talking about the core nuances between yourselves and those other alternatives that I just described.
Yeah, we saw that early in our evolution around the usage economy. I mean, we've been working on this for over a decade. I mean, it was 2012, 2013 when we really started sinking our teeth into usage-based monetization for much more broader markets outside of telecom. I mean, the telecommunications industry has been focused on a usage-based metric since their inception.
Yep.
So we've
per text message is also one of those early ones that you think about,
Yeah. And what we uncovered was that there were, new digital businesses that were still using the old legacy models of seat-based licensing. And what we found and what we posited was that there was a lot of money left on the table with consumers that really would love to have used the services, but they didn't fit neatly in those tiered models of pricing. And our work was really creating technology around being able to easily manage those complexities around a usage-based environment, where the mindset shift was into access instead of ownership. Are you
Yeah.
are you seeing that happening with the clients that you're talking to? And what industries? Obviously, the digital economy and SaaS-based services are in the forefront of these conversations because their AI is driving a lot of the
Yeah.
process around outcomes, agentic AI. How do you price for that? I mean, it's easy to measure input metrics, but it's very difficult or more difficult to measure output metrics in talking about the outcomes that
Yeah.
we're trying to monetize. What industries are you seeing other than the digital world that they're starting to move into that direction? And what do you think the key drivers are? Is it competitive threats?
Yeah.
Is it that, Jack Welch said, change before you have to? Are they recognizing that there are forces now that you really have to think hard about how value is perceived by your customer and how you price that value in terms of their interpretations of it?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll give a couple of examples. The first one that comes to mind is in professional services. And so, a lot of you hear, how do you price? Do you price for time and materials? Like, I'm going to give you a bucket of hours, or do you price for a fixed project fee? And yes, that's still the most common, I would say, in professional services. But then you can have this outcome oriented pricing that says, hey, if I'm a pricing consultancy and I believe in my ability to drive your margins and change your top line performance,
Yeah.
let's put some skin in the game and align our contract around the fact that let's measure something. And then if I can make an appreciable difference over the next 6, 12, 18 months, we'll share in that. But there'll typically be some fixed portion that would cover, say, a bare cost of delivering that, because there is the eventual possibility that maybe you don't drive as much as you thought you did, but
Right.
certainly moving in that direction. I would say that's increasing in my world, just from my own personal lens, but I see it in other industries that we work with as well, or other professional services firms, where they're looking at how can we deliver an outcome and how can we price around that. So in terms of the why, I think it's just pressure. So you feel the pressure from rising inflation and cost pressure, margin pressure, and I think there's just this do more, be more productive. And so I think just the spend, post COVID, what I've seen is that the number of folks involved in the B2B procurement decision or supply chain decision, it has gone from about 8 to 12, like that buying center has expanded.
Yeah.
And what that means is that no one wants to make a wrong decision. And there's often these consensus based selling motions. And it's often much easier to say, hey, we only need to allocate 50% of our expected budget for this project. And if they win, it's going to be a win-win for both of us. And we don't have to budget that out of our expenses today. So I do think there's just an alignment around let's kind of get on the train of if what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Not in all cases, but that's certainly one. Another example could be in manufacturing or distribution. So in these types of almost more commoditized, hey, if we're distributing something that everyone else distributes, it's the wraparound services that actually differentiate customers for customers in terms of which vendors to work with. And so vendors are always looking at ways to add mini-vations or small innovations to say, hey, we can deliver more for you. So one of the clients that we worked with is they kind of added an inventory visibility metric. So for key clients that purchased above a certain threshold or a share of wallet that was high enough, they would actually give real-time inventory updates so they could see exactly what was available, but that was not available to all audiences. So you had to have a certain number of SKUs or a certain basket of goods to see that. And that would be important for the customers because they could say, okay, great, I can get this tomorrow, and therefore I can plan my production process or kind of drop ships around what's available. And that really helped with their certainty and risk reduction. And so that sort of metric was really highlighted as a key value driver for them, and they could kind of orient an offer around something that wasn't previously shared with
Yeah.
customers.
Yeah, you make a good point. I think that there is some real-time information throughout the experience that informs customers of the value that they're receiving, and that will drive more engagement with understanding why the outcome occurred and give them more confidence. Um, I think that is a very important element of that whole value chain when it comes to that. Now, I think the question is there first mover advantage in your industry? Or because I think they're looking around, in the brick and mortar market place and business segments, they're waiting for someone else to take that first step, and then they're forced to change.
Yeah.
What examples have you seen out there now where there's some first mover advantage to providing these types of options to the clients?
Yeah, like you could think of all this new AI tech, and Apple for the longest time has sort of been the second mouse gets the cheese kind of,
Right.
or Meta, hey, Reels or whatever it is, copied from someone else, and they monetize it very effectively.
Huh.
I think there is a similar effect going on here with some of these metrics, and ultimately it comes back a little bit to what I said in the beginning about how is the metric actually a competitive advantage for different companies.
So how do you
And
pick
so,
the right? So how do you pick the right metric?
yeah. So how do you pick the right metric? So here's the framework that I use for this. It's really four parts. The first is you want it aligned with value, and typically we call this value accrual. That means that as you consume more of something, the amount of revenue you're generating for your business is actually increasing. So that's sort of the first lens. If you don't have that, it's not really a great metric. The second is transparency. So you need to be able to measure it, and both sides of the equation need to be able to see that it's true. And so if I'm selling something and I know that my customer wants to consume more of it, both sides need to be able to see it. I can't just say, hey, you consume more units of compute because I said so. You need to be able to show that your client is actually running more queries and getting more value out of it. The third is what's technically feasible. So when I implement something, is this
Sure.
going to be a big change? Is it going to be a small change? Is this data that I have available? And then the final one is economics. So like the value accrual is certainly part of it, but is it going to be good for my company? If I do this, is it good for the customer if I do this? So they want to just estimate that bottom line impact. Often it's like a winner loser analysis to say, hey, I paid this much last year. If we switch to this new metric, what does that mean for me? So there's kind of a pre-post forecast.
Yeah.
So we'll go through an exercise for usually a fairly long list of metrics. It might be 5 to 10 that kind of says, hey, here's how in our price architecture we should monetize this service or this product. And often you can shortlist pretty quickly down to a few. And usually what we like to say is we don't want to have, like, 3 is sort of the kind of the max. If you start to get more than 4, it really gets too complex, and then that transparency or confusion. Someone looks at the price sheet and they're like, well, with this 3-dimensional grid, where am I supposed to find myself in situation A, B, and C? So usually if you can have a couple different metrics, that's the best in class, even if one of those is more of a traditional fixed component subscription or seat fee, and then there's something that changes with consumption or usage. That's sort of where we like to land. And then I think the other lens that you just asked about is, well, now that I have the last, these top 2, how does my competition, what are they doing? How are my customers accustomed to purchasing? Because if I'm going to give them something that is just so foreign to them, that's going to feel dissonant or hard to adopt. And I want to make sure that I'm not shooting myself in the foot accidentally, even if I think I have something that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I think hybrid models really start to fit the bill when there's a cost associated with standing up the stack in order to deliver the service to the
Yeah.
customer. And then that unpredictable revenue stream that might happen through variability. And that's a really great question for you. How do you address predictability in sort of usage and outcome-based models? And
Yeah.
how are customers thinking about that?
Yeah.
Particularly
So
with revenue recognition and various other elements that they have to adhere to, and they've got forecasts that they're trying to fulfill What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah. So there are three ways. Thanks for the question. The first one is, think about a hindsight experiment where you're kind of running whatever new potential model with last year's or the last 2 years of data to say, hey, here's what it would have looked like. So you can kind of give some answer around, if you behave the way you behaved, here's how the world looks. And you can kind of say, we're not quadrupling your price here. We're basically making sure that when you experience success, we can deliver that for you, and we're kind of along for the ride. And when you're using less, or times of slowness, seasonality, whatever it is, your budget also will dip down in terms of your expense for our service. So that's sort of the first one. The second one is that if you think about sort of the percentage of allocation, so it might be that you adopt this new metric and you're like, hey, you know what? We're only going to have 5% of our fee included in this type of measurement. And by the way, once you sort of have that in there, it's pretty easy to the next year to say, hey, that worked pretty well. Let's move it to 10, let's move it to 20. And it starts to become that variable component, a bigger contribution of your relationship. And that can kind of, it's like the boil the frog, but it gives both sides a chance to sort of test that out and kind of experience, is it working? What's not working? Is there predictability? And by the way, when I pay more, am I also experiencing a better outcome? So customers can be more confident that they see it. And the final one is that, you know, we see it for customers that maybe sell to the government or large organizations that really want predictability, is they're making tiers and volume tiers that say, hey, here's this much usage. We can right size this amount. Like, you can use more. I won't penalize you, but next year, next quarter, at the renewal cycle, at the adjustment cycle, then we'll just bump up your tier to a predictable new place around the cycle that you budget on. So that's kind of another mechanism that we've seen work pretty well.
Yeah, and I don't think it has to be an all or none proposition. I think it could be an element of your customer base that this applies to, or products in your product catalog that will have much more logical value to be delivered from an outcome perspective. And this is why the conversations that I'm having with people always seem to circle back to these hybrid models. How would you test certain models in the marketplace based on your experiences that you've seen?
Yeah, I think there's probably a sort of a crawl, walk, run here a little bit. I mean, so some clients that we work with literally test, you know, some new outcome aligned variable on a spreadsheet. They're like, hey, how much value are we delivering? How many projects are we delivering? How many widgets do we deliver? And yeah, we just charge today based on, say, a quantity purchased or a project done. But what if we, in advance of our next renewal or in this new model, we just start kind of a value scorecard where we start messaging all of this other value, all these other services that we provide, and literally tell our customers about it. Because what we often find is that you have a QBR or an ABR, and you're kind of having very structured communications at sort of infrequent intervals. And those are very much around, hey, here's what the price was, here's some accomplishments, but it's not in your customer's face about the ongoing value that you're driving. So if you think you can measure, here's the expenses that we're reducing for you, or the risk we're absolving for you, and you tell folks about it, it often gets folks in the mindset of, okay, yeah, the pie is larger. And then when I start to add one of these metrics into the mix, I've seen it before, and that's not the new change. Like, I've already been informed about it for the last 6, 12, 18 months. So usually we say, you know, any conversation about price starts with value. And you don't, if you're sort of called in the last minute to have like an RFP, hey, submit your best price, and you haven't had a relationship, you're probably not in a great position to win. And I think the same goes for monetization model shifts. Is they want, your customers really should understand what you're providing. And then it makes a lot more sense when you add some sort of monetization metric aligned with that service that you're providing, or the outcome that they're experiencing. And not every stakeholder, with those 12 people in the buying center, not everyone has the same lens of what they care about. Some folks are strictly, you know, ROI and metrics focused. Others are very much user experience focused. It kind of depends on who you're talking to, but you need to get them all on the same sheet of music, which isn't always the easiest thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it seems that the consensus really is about being flexible and real time. You either respond or go forward with your models. What are your prognostications for the future in the next 5-10 years? How do you see things playing out?
Yeah, I
It's
do
a
think.
really difficult question. I apologize for that.
Yeah, no,
It's a really tough question, but
it's interesting. Like if you had asked, 20 years ago with our, GE and Michelin examples, like how soon would this catch on?
right,
Probably would have said a faster answer than 20, 25 years later. And we're
right,
still in sort of dip your toe in the water
sure,
hybrid world. Um, I still think we're going to move towards it faster now. The pace of innovation and just the ability to measure more is just at a point where we have not been in the past. So
right,
I think the amount of data at our fingertips is going to enable these models. And to your point, I think the biggest thing driving it is exactly what you said. So think about the thought experiment of, okay, you've got a per seat model. Um, Forget that the level of productivity in that one seat is different than it was 10 years ago. But in the instance when you're a company who just wants to test out a small amount, that's going to be a hurdle that's too high to reach. Or if you're a company that has immense value that you drive from that one seat because you have a single login that you share, or that single power user is just incredibly productive, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. So just in the same way that we went to a series of versions in the SaaS world of like a good, better, and best to align to, hey, someone that's using a little versus a medium amount versus a high, I think the same thing is going to happen. And then as opposed to just 3 points on that curve, just think of an unlimited smooth demand curve where you can try a small amount for a low price or
right,
high usage for a high price. And I think that's going to be incredibly important because even in this world, if you look at the GPT subscriptions and power users of different tech, it's
mhm,
kind of the long tail, not even a long tail. It's like the last 5%
right,
of users are driving so much compute. And I think you're going to have similar effects in different industries. And it's going to be hard to kind of capture that if you only have a handful of versions or prices. And so I think your companies are going to want to make sure that they're finding where their users, where their customers are getting the most value from, and making sure there's a way to offer more for them, but also capture and share appropriately in
sure.
that value.
Absolutely, because they have fixed costs and they have investments in their networks and their architecture and their services
Yeah.
that are pretty constant. And trying to find that balance with customer demand, customer usage is tricky. And I just keep coming back to this notion where a hybrid approach seems to be what we're settling on right now, and that
Yeah.
the clear use cases in certain circumstances it's relatively clear. You've seen Salesforce. We're going to see how that translates over time, and various other organizations that are doing it purely on outcome. But I think right now the consensus really is around a hybrid approach of some form of subscription, some form of consistency with this variable component. That
And it's not just that dynamic I said with just high usage and in pockets, but I do think even your stores around the street on Main Street, think of a bookstore that's trying to think about different revenue streams, whether it's a rental model or send you recommendations or subscription boxes. I just think there's going to be a need to have diversified revenue streams and even what feel like very traditional brick and mortar or corner office businesses. And so I just think that there's going to be more diffusion about, all right, what are different ways I can charge? How are my customers interacting with me? I
yeah,
need to measure that and then give them an offering that's aligned to how they're experiencing interacting with me.
yeah. I think obviously the mind trust and the mind share has really been around AI lately. Of course, I mean it's undeniable.
Yeah.
Um, Brick and mortar businesses, I think, have not yet really thought hard about this, and I think it's going to be an important conversation in those boardrooms in the next several years as AI starts to infiltrate within all of their processes and all of their outcomes. It'll be a much bigger conversation for them. Um, any final parting thoughts before we conclude the podcast?
Yeah, I think in terms of where folks fall down here, I would say, for folks listening, they're like, okay, totally get it. I'm 100% on the usage-based outcome train. Where do I even get started?
Right.
We've seen so I mentioned one thing in professional services, okay, how can we deliver an outcome? We'll do a revenue share or a profit boost adder to our projects. That can be something you just add into a contract in the world of professional services. But I think it kind of comes down to piloting in a small number of contracts. So if you have just tens of thousands of transactions that are happening every day and hundreds or more customers, you're going to need some system to help you, because if you're the smallest individual and the smallest vendor, yes, you can probably get your arms around, okay, I'm going to try this in this one pocket of customers, new customers in this one segment, sure. But once you scale beyond that, the complexity of just counting different things and like your back end tech, depending on what CRM and ERP you're using, it can become unwieldy quickly. I mentioned kind of like the rule of two, but even at two could mean doubling the number of metrics in which you charge. Like if it's literally a fee per each that you charge now, having something that varies can be fairly complex. So you really have to be mindful of how do you make this happen. I think you can run experiments in small areas, but once you realize that it's a good thing for you and your customers, you want repeatability. And you could certainly build an in-house tech stack, but then I think that's where, frankly, your organization comes in to sort of hit the easy button and outsource everything. And hey, I've got this data. Can you just manage it and everything else that goes with it? I think that's so powerful, because you're going to get someone to quote unquote success in months versus like a year plus of building your own tech stack. By the way, will it even work? It might not be worth the investment.
Sure. Well, I'm going to leave you with one comment that you piqued a new topic for our next podcast, and that's this new notion of service as a software. And what I mean by that is there's these conversations that are going on right now about how legacy SaaS platforms will have to reinvent themselves on how they deliver their capabilities to their customers. And will it be small tool sets that get delivered around a consulting-based practice? Because with agentic AI and all these various tools that are coming out and this hyper automation, you can really start providing very fast point solutions to many problems. And organizations really understand that their knowledge base is delivered through software, but it's also delivered through the technological aspects of their experiences and their problem solving that they've done in the past, where this is going to be potentially a new dynamic. So we're going to save that for the next podcast.
Yeah, I love it. Kind of a return to services. Yeah.
A really interesting conversation. I've been looking at it, and it's fascinating, where professional services might now have a larger role in SaaS-based businesses, a consultative approach to problem solving, with the augmentation of agentic AI being a part of that.
Yeah, but in a nutshell, what you're saying is consumers want more confidence in the choices they make, not an overabundance of choice. And so to the degree that companies can help them in this world that's just exploding with tooling, I think that there's absolutely something there.
Well, and it's not like it's a rip and replace. We're still adding to all these legacy systems, which take a different tact in terms of how you deliver your product and services. And it does require a consultative approach to doing that.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a way to tie in that level of value with what's called, either traditional or usage or outcome-based licensing. We're still thinking of it as licensing. I think we need to really think about it as value, as you mentioned, value that's delivered in so many different aspects of the organization to the consumer. And so service as a software, that's my next podcast with you.
All right. Put it on the docket.
Yeah, Peter, thank you very much. I really appreciated the conversation.